So today we're working on the Green Phoenix. We're going to get the engine tore down and see what we find in there. So before we start ripping the head off this thing, I'm going to take some of this stuff off the side of the engine, get it out of the way. Now I do not have this thing on my good stand with the pan. We do have the oil drained and as much water as we can get out of it, but it's still going to drip, so we threw some cardboard underneath of it. I think that's pretty standard for YouTube, isn't it? Now, I could go ahead and just take this bolt out here, underneath here, and then take it loose here and take this off as one assembly, the oil filter housing. But our threads here are goofed up from a prior owner cross-threading stuff. And it's really difficult to get a oil filter on and off, so we're going to be replacing that. So I'm going to go ahead and start taking it loose here while I got the leverage on it here before I take it loose there. So yeah, let's get all this stuff off the side of it and get started. Get that loose. Now on the back side here, this fitting here, you have to hold on to this one with one wrench while you loosen this one. This always will come loose in the block with this because you got a crush washer in here, so it's tighter here than it is there. So you have to do the double wrench method or you're going to be frustrated with it. So I'll finish taking everything off here. We'll probably do this and speed it up a little bit. Yeah, there may be a hint there as to what's going on inside the engine. All right, so now it's time to start opening this thing up. Now, we do think this thing might have been rebuilt at some point. Originally, I wasn't sure about that, but it is orange instead of black. And I think we put the camera down in there and found that it was overbore by like 20 or 30 thousandths, but I don't remember for sure how much it was off the top of my head. And we were having some issues with this thing on oil pressure, and we know we got a wiped cam. Several lobes on the cam are wiped, but the oil pressure was looking really good when you first started and held good until it really started warming up. And as it warmed up, it kept dropping and dropping and dropping until when it was fully warmed, like driving clear across town, it would drop down to under 10 pounds at idle. So that is not good. So we'll see when we get in here what we find. But we know it's not happy. Now they do say what you should do is loosen the head in the same sequence as the torque pattern. And of course this pattern always starts in the center. Basically works your way in a circular pattern. Well, I wasn't going to take that completely off, but I'm just trying to loosen them. Because all this paint on them, they get stuck. I think that one's going to, nope. Sometimes they'll pull the whole stud out, and that's fine. When they do, because sometimes these heads get stuck on the studs. Because water can migrate up some of these on this side and cause them to freeze up in the cylinder head. Usually around these center ones. I've actually had one time where it just simply would not come out. So there's a whole stud. And I had to spin the head off and get the unscrew the stud because it was so stuck in the cylinder head. That has happened before. Now this is a really early head. The casting date on is 11/62, so it's a 63 head. And of course, this is a 79 engine. Now I'm sure somebody out there would probably really like to have this head for a early car. The 3 main 1800 I have laying around here had a cracked head on it. All right. Now you want to take out all of the push rods in order. I have this little piece of foam I use. You gotta watch, they can come loose. They can pull out the lifters out of the holes, which for what we're doing here, that doesn't matter. But if you were, say, just trying to service the head, and you didn't want to take the side covers off, you need to make sure you shake them and get them to release from the lifters before you pull them out. So now we can see if we can get this head to come loose. Now you can kind of crank it over against the compression sometimes and pop it. Sometimes they'll lift up really easy and sometimes they won't. Nope, not gonna do it. We'll get our dead blow hammer here and just give it a couple taps. Hear the sound change. Means it's lost its seal, broke its seal. We can take a look here. See, we got one valve receding pretty bad here on the exhaust side. Now we are going to be swapping heads on this to a 72 to 74 head and getting the compression up on this thing a little bit. So what do we actually have for pistons here? Well, you know what? Those aren't those are not later pistons or the earlier pistons. They are deeper dish pistons. So this thing was at a really low compression ratio, probably 7.5 to 1 maybe. All right, so maybe I was mistaken on this engine for the nether engine of seeing marks in the top of 20 or 30 thousandths because there's obviously too much carbon buildup to tell. Nope, this motor's never been rebuilt. Those are factory pistons. Because you would say plus 10, plus 20, plus 30, or whatever it is here if it didn't. And that is just factory markings, low compression pistons. So this thing will run a heck of a lot better when we're done with it. I might go ahead and get all the studs out before we move on, and these can be fun. Sometimes take a stud puller, so we're not going to bore you with that. I know the head gasket's covered a lot of oil, but everything looks fine here. I don't see no areas where there was any issues, but we didn't suspect any head gasket problems. So let's get this thing flipped over, get the oil pan off of it. So actually, before we get the oil pan off of it, let's get the lifters out of it and see what they look like. On its side, they're a little bit easier to get out. Yep, that one's bad. That one's bad. That one's probably not a wiped cam, but the lifter is bad. That one's actually not too bad, just starting to pull stuff out of the surface, but not too bad compared to the rest. Yep, that'll be a wiped lobe. That was not too bad. Probably the best one so far. And that'll be wiped. So we probably got 4 wiped lobes. I'm going to go ahead and take this tubular drive gear out too first. Get that on out of the way now. So I don't forget it's not in there, or forget it's still in there and wonder why it's not coming apart. Now there's a slotted screw in here. I'm going to get on a whole other thing with a, oops, get in here and have a nice big screwdriver. Give it some shocks, and then use, like this has a place you can get a wrench, whole wrench, and we can put tons of pressure on it and get it to pop out. And then these can be a bit of an issue to get out. Sometimes you're going to have to tap on these things back and forth with a hammer lightly to get them to come loose. Never want to hit them really hard though, because they are cast iron and you can break them. But some gentle persuasion to get it to twist. Can do wonders for getting this thing to come loose. And you just have to work it on out of there. If it's a motor that's never been apart, these can be a real bear to get out sometimes. And then a 5/16 fine thread, pull the distributor drive out. Now we can take the oil pan off. Never been a big proponent of using power tools to take stuff like this apart, but as I get older and as these battery powered ones become more readily available, I'm liking this stuff. I never like taking things apart with power tools because I don't want to strip bolts out, but that doesn't have so much power that you're going to readily strip anything out. There we go. Yummy. So now we'll go ahead and get the oil pump on out of here, which is just these 3 bolts here. You can pull that up out. You got some little crap in the screen. Now, since we know we're just going to be ripping this thing apart and sending it all to the machine shop, you know, going to continue on with power tools. I didn't think that thing was going to be that strong. That's why I'm not so bothered about that thing stripping bolts out, because it can't even take apart something that's been torqued to 45 pounds. Well, let's see what number 1 looks like. Now, what you should do is mark these things before we take them off. What I'm going to do when I get this one on the bench, put this back together and go ahead and put some marks on there to mark it number 1. A lot of people like to do it when before you take anything loose, and I usually do, but for some reason I got myself in a hurry here today, and had it apart before I thought about it for some reason. Yeah, looks like oil control rings lost tension. Now we know which side this goes from the factory because the factory inspection marks, stampings here, and both sides of the rod will have the same stampings, and you can put them on the same way, and that's where you know what you got. I'm not seeing quite as much damage right there as I was expecting. We'll continue on. So put some dots there, 4 dots, 3, 2, and 1. That's the way to do it. And in my case, I have this automatic punch. Makes it nice and easy to do that with. Might as well go ahead and do it from now on, since I should be doing that. We're definitely through the first layer. See how dark that is, how it's really dark gray. Now if it's a tri-metal bearing, there'll be a copper face in there, and then you'll see copper rather than this really dark gray. So we put this back together. Do this one by one. I'm always putting them back together in the same order. Take them off. The other thing you can look at too, like if you do get a cap off, on these at least, the tangs will be on the same side. So if you forget which way the cap goes because you didn't mark it, make sure the tang on the top and the bottom are both on the same side of the rod. Pretty much the same. No big surprises so far. Usually if they get stuck to the crank and don't stay on the rod, that means they've been hot. That one wasn't too bad, but see, it's not really being held in there more, so now it's basically collapsed just a little bit from getting hot. That's just another sign of where we kept going with it. Probably it could have potentially spun a bearing. So yeah, that's why you don't ignore it when your oil pressure is down low. Because once you spin a bearing, it's going to cost you a little bit more. You'll have damage on the crank, potentially damaging, and generally you'll have damage to the rod, have to put a rod in because of the heat. Wow, see? And you can actually look at the bearings here, and by the little markings on it, you can tell. These are standard bearings, the STD, and if you know what you're looking at, you can tell whether they're factory bearings or been replaced. Because replacement bearings will have brand names in them. This one's stuck on the journal as well, so yeah. So see how that thing just barely was sitting there. We weren't too far away from spinning these. All right, well, let's get the timing cover off, harmonic balancer, timing chain, and then we'll get the cam out and show you all of its glory. I want to slide off, then apply a little pressure evenly. Don't want to crank hard on it and damage the cover. I would say the timing cover is probably been off of it, simply because all this being orange and this being black, you know, most people aren't going to sit and take the time to go around this. They're just going to do it with that off and then slap that back on. I like something a little bit thinner to go in there. And just kind of don't force it. Get it to break free in multiple places. Yeah, that's been off. Somebody has beat this out away because it probably got knocked in at one point. These things, I have seen one of these knocked in it before, where it was rubbing on the cam, creating all kinds of interesting noises. On a fresh rebuild that the guy installed himself and dented the cover on putting it in. So we need to knock that over. And of course, it's still a single row timing chain, which is factory on this car, for 79. We will likely upgrade to a dual row timing chain and probably buy the better one as well. I've never had any problems with the timing chains, but now they do make an upgraded one. And we'll probably go ahead and do that one because it's not a big difference in price. Or at least when you're talking the cost of an engine build, it's not that much. So in this case, we're going to pry these things off slowly and surely, which we could take the you know, obviously we could take this loose now or later. Either way, it should still come out. And yeah, having this in place right now is probably hurting me. So let me go ahead and get that off. I'm going to take it off first, but I'm just for some reason in a hurry for the camera for some reason. The wear on that isn't terrible, so maybe they put a timing chain tensioner on it at some point when they had it apart. Because I would expect, looking at the rest of it, to have more wear than we're actually seeing. I'll show you that here in a minute. And just rock it back and forth until it comes off. Just see that kind of wear there? That is not a lot of wear for one of these, especially considering what the bearings and everything look like. So I'd say whenever they put the head on it, painted it, they probably did a fresh one of these. Of course, these are really cheap, so they probably went ahead and did it. Now at this point, we really kind of need to get this whole front plate off of here. So we're going to go ahead and take that off next before we pull the cam actually out of there. So of course on my other stand I can turn it up and make it really easy to pull this out and not have to try to support it. Of course we're not worried about damaging the cam. I just don't want to damage the cam bearings, you know, by taking it out of there. Of course this might end up likely needing cam bearings anyway. They don't always need cam bearings. But obviously, yeah, that's definitely toast. Oh wow, yeah, that one's ugly. That one's toast. 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 And yeah, damage to every single lobe on the cam. No wonder it didn't run very good. So now we just gotta get the mains out of here, and these are gonna take a slide hammer in the center, front and rear mains. Now it's pretty obvious as which one's the front, rear, and center, but the 2 and 4 here are exactly the same casting. So it's a good idea to go ahead and just make a mark, something you can see once it's clean. So you know which one they are. Now if you want to do it, you can just put 1 dot here and 2 dots there because you know That's front, that's back. But I think it's a good idea to go ahead and just mark 2 and 4. Of course, earlier motors use studs. Later ones use the bolts. The other interesting thing about this motor is supposedly in 79 they switched to rods without balance pads. They were completely balanced properly from the factory, but this one has balance pads. So maybe it was later in 79 that they did it than what this car was built. Or potentially it's not the original engine, but as far as we know it is. But we'll double check the engine number. And I think we double checked that already and it looked like it was probably the original one, but we'll have to double check that again. Wow, that one's surprisingly loose. It should be a more slightly snug fit like this one here is. Well, those bearings are looking a lot better than I was expecting. So to pull these things out, what I did was basically welded a 3/4 fine thread bolt onto a bolt that would fit my little slide hammer here. It's just a Harbor Freight slide hammer. And you don't want to skimp on turning it in there. I know it can, you think you get tired of turning it, but you don't want to skimp because you can pull the threads out, especially out of the front and rear. Wow, those bearings look a lot better than the rest of the engine. I would suggest not going crazy, just in case you didn't get in there deep enough. You don't want to just yank the threads out. Bearing still on the crank. Wow. Now I'm going to have to deal with this one. The threads are buggered on this thing. I might have to come up with a new game plan. Alright, so we got that one out. Bearing looks okay here too, and they're all standard size bearings. Now the threads are buggered here. So somebody might have had pulled this apart and not gotten in there enough and stuffed some standard bearings in there. And we're going to have to get a bottling tap to run down in there and see if we can't get enough threads, because that's going to cause us a big problem reassembling the motor. So now we can get the crank out. And we can look at the crank. We don't see any real scoring or any major issues. So we get this thing down to the machine shop. Get this thing boiled out, cleaned up, and you can mic everything and see if the crank can be polished, stay within spec, or if they need to go say 1010. And we know we're at standard bore. What we can do is look at the bore here itself, and you can run your fingernail up and down here, and you can see that there's not a huge ridge there. And it'll tend to wear on one side a little bit more than the other because of the thrust. But yeah, that'll clean up probably at 20 thousandths. But we're probably going to go ahead and go 30 on this just for the good combination to get a little bit more oomph out of it. So now we got all this part here. We'll get all the parts cleaned up and get them off the machine shop. Now part of the reason why we're probably just going to go ahead and go to 30 over is we went ahead and got this Q Parts Fast Road camshaft. This comes with cam, lifters, springs, and alloy caps. And we're going to do the 8.8 to 1 pistons in it, but we're using a 72 to 74 head, which is a small chamber head, which should give us about 9.2-ish to 1 compression, depending on how the head actually comes out. We're probably going to take that head that we originally got for this, get it all prepped and ported and put on my engine, take the one off my engine and put it on here. We can calculate the compression ratio as we're putting it back together. But it should be somewhere around 9 1/4 to 1. And with the fast road cam, 30 over, it should be a decent performer.